everyone. My name is Nicole Simmons Rochon. I am the Programs Director for Programs and Resources from the Division of DEI here at UCCS. It is a pleasure to see and be with all of you and also to our persons who are virtual as well. We would like to get started and we'll do so first and foremost by starting with what we would call our rules of discourse, just making sure that we're all in the same playing field, we're all understanding my purpose, our purpose of why we are here. Today we are addressing, can we fix crime? Can you fix crime? And with that, we want to make sure that in our statements and our communications with each other, we aim to use I statements. Share only your personal experience unless you've gotten permission from someone else that is okay with that. Remember that ideas and opinions can be fluid. So challenge an idea, but don't challenge a person. Rather, you agree or disagree. That's important to remember. Assume best intentions. Embrace accountability of your impact. So it is possible that a statement, you may say a statement that could possibly offend someone else. That may not be your intent, but it was the impact. So we're keeping those things in mind as we converse with each other. Seeking to understand and respect diverse opinions. Again, we all have come from different walks of life. And I think that ability for us to share enables us to learn from each other, not so much compare, but learn. And then also share the time so that we all can learn from each other. So it is okay if there's a lot to be stated. We can definitely take turns in sharing our opinions, but we definitely want to make sure that everyone feels as if their voice will be heard while we are here. Challenge by choice. That's more of a self-care statement. It means that we may have an opinion on something. I may have an opinion on something, but if that topic kind of makes me feel a little, maybe I know I'm emotional, so I might cry. I might choose not to speak because I just don't want to be that vulnerable in this setting. Or I may also battle with some other emotions like anger or frustration. I want to make sure that I'm able to channel it the correct way. So maybe I'll take a step back and allow for other people to share instead of being the first to the mic. Something to think about. And then lastly, or not actually lastly, but hate speech and discriminatory language and actions are not permitted. So we want to make sure that that is stated and that we are all understanding of it and we are ready to move forward. I would like to broadly make a comment towards our topics that we speak about today may be triggering. Please, if you do need to step out, please do so. We will be talking about subjects that may seem directly or indirectly connected to maybe some public awareness that we all are aware of. It is okay to question things in a general statement, but if indeed we get on subjects where we may want to know specifics about criminal activities or things that we may be aware of due to activities and unfortunate circumstances that have happened recently at UCCS, we want to make sure that everyone is aware that if there is any specifics, we cannot address certain things. So do not be offended if by chance anyone from our panel may have to pass on a specific question, and that's okay. Again, we are only wanting to make sure that we provide this great platform that we can have this open conversation. And then lastly, my role. My role is just to guide the conversation. I'm just here to talk and to enable all of us to have a place, have a platform if we do need it. It is not to take sides. It is also not to impose my opinion on anything as well. It is just to facilitate the conversation. ensure that all of you have the opportunity to speak and express your perspectives without interruption. Awesome. Well, to get us started, I'd like to do a few thank yous. We definitely want to send out great thank yous to our SGA. We want to send out thank yous to our LAS, the Division of DEI, Kramer Family Library, and the Center of Religious Diversity and Public Life. We thank you all for allowing us to have this great conversation and a great platform to do it. So we will get started with introductions. We would like to have a brief introduction of you, however you want to introduce yourself. We encourage it, and we'll start with Dr. Portillos.
Hi, my name is Dr. Edwardo Portillos. You can call me Eddie. I've been here at UCCS for a number of years, probably since 2005, I believe. I'm getting old, so I don't recall the exact timing. But I am an associate professor, and I am the chair of the Sociology department. My research here at UCCS has looked at youth gangs, school criminalization, crime in the Latinx community, and a whole variety of issues around those kinds of things. Also community police relations. I teach here at UCCS youth gangs, juvenile delinquency, criminology, social corrections at the graduate level, inequality, crime, and justice. So that's just a brief introduction.
Can you guys hear me? Is it okay? Great. Awesome. So my name is Dewayne McCarver. I'm the chief of police here at UCCS. I came here after a 28-year career with the Huntsville Police Department in Alabama. As I came up, through the ranks over that 28 years, I did pretty much almost everything I think within a police department to be able to do. And throughout that 28 years, my perspective as a police officer changed immensely. Which is why when I retired, I thought this would be a fantastic place to come and be a part of. Not only as a chief of police, but as a part of the community for things exactly like this. I think these conversations are so important. I think it's fantastic for us all to be able to share perspectives and talk about experiences, because that's how we grow. That's how we all grow together. That's how we become better. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part in this. And I look forward to this discussion.
Thanks. My name is Ryan Forbes. And in 2014, I caused a crash that cost a young man his life. From that, I got a 10-year prison sentence in Texas and 10 years probation as well. I spent 6 years in Texas prisons, and during that time I got a degree in sociology. I studied victim advocacy and criminology as well. And now I just got done making a restorative justice graphic novel as part of my community service. And also I do a podcast where we talk about the criminal justice system and people's personal experiences with it. Thank you.
My name is Aiyanna Quinones. I am doing my undergraduate degree in sociology. I have a variety of experiences, and I believe that there's so much power in the subjective and in experiences. There's so much that can be taken from the particular points to the big picture, which is something I'm so excited for. One of my passions, I'm currently doing a research project about community corrections and restorative justice. And as I get further into that, I'm just learning so much. And there is so many phenomenal and interesting and innovative things going on right now that I think are wonderful to talk about. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Those are excellent introductions. I think we can start off. I am a forever learner, so I like to start off with a more descriptive. Let's build a word box, and I think our main word, or our text box for today, is restorative justice. So with that context, restorative justice is somewhat defined as seeking to examine a crime or some harm, the impact of a crime, and then being able to repair the harm that the crime may have caused by also holding either a person, a system responsible for that particular crime. When you all hear that word, what do you all think of? What comes to mind? And that can go to anyone.
Go ahead.
Well, restorative justice, I think I've heard, several different over my career, and especially over the last several years, different ways of thinking about it. One of those would be, restoring justice in a bigger picture, right? To a more broad group of any people in our community, to try to right long-term issues that have kind of led us to where we are, any individual today. And then the other way that we think about it is more like the description that you gave, which is how do we, in a more holistic way, have justice that is actually something that makes the world better and repairs things and brings some normalcy back to the situation that was damaged by some act. And so I think that's both of those two ways of thinking about restorative justice, I think, are very valid, things that need to be discussed. And we'll see where this discussion sort of goes.
Yeah, when I hear restorative justice, my thinking always goes to healing, because from my understanding, from my dealings with it, from my working with people with a lot of restorative justice experience, that's always seems to be the goal. Is it's about healing, and it's also about that community aspect of it. And it's about reaching out to the community and seeing who's hurt and seeing how can we help and figure out what's going on with it, which is it's different than the way people traditionally look at whenever there's a deviant behavior or a crime is committed, because people don't tend to think of how can we help. It's more of who can we blame, who caused this. Where restorative justice, I really like the idea that it goes, all right, who's been hurt and how can we help them?
When I think of restorative justice, I'm not an expert in that area. I don't know the different theories, different approaches around restorative justice, but I certainly advocate for that approach. And in many of the classes that I teach, criminology, youth gangs, that's certainly a perspective that I think that we need to integrate more rather than longer punitive sentences. I think more restorative justice approaches could be useful. So when I think of restorative justice, I think of some of the academics that I read, that I assign to my students to read. People like Robert Duran, Victor Rios, Christopher Bolden, Catherine Maldonado. All of them were former gang members. All of them sold drugs, carried weapons, all those kinds of things. So when we think about gangs, they fit that image, right? They were the people that we should be fearful of, that we're told to be scared of, those kinds of things. But they turned their lives around. There was one person that took an interest in them, that mattered to them, and said, hey, you know what? I'm here for you. Yes, you're messing up, but I'm here for you. And when they were ready, they took advantage of that opportunity, right? And so individuals like that, Victor Rios is at University of California, Santa Barbara. You can look him up. He has a PBS little segment, 5-10 minutes, that you can find on YouTube. He has a documentary. He has several books and articles. Very well-known sociologist. It could have been easy to lock him up at 15, 16 for the rest of his life. But somebody took an interest in it. Somebody made a difference in his life. And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to remember when we talk about social restorative justice, right? That people can make amends. People can change their lives. but we need to recognize also that there are other kinds of issues, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, that impact their lives that we need to be aware of.
Piggybacking off of that, talking about the context of it, the one thing I never liked about punitive justice is that it looked basically only at the moment, the instant that something happened, and it fails to recognize the context in which it happened in, what led up to that, what's happening after that, what's happening to the people around that person. There's so many things that go into this, right? And another thing, because y'all wonderfully already talked about what I was thinking about when you say restorative justice. Ding. One thing I think about restorative justice, and a question I ask myself, is when we're restoring something, what are we restoring back to? Because a lot of people are just like, is that person now out of the correction system? They've been restored, right? But something wasn't working with their normal. Something was amiss with what was. So I think making sure that when we're talking about restorative justice, we're restoring to something better than what was, and not just plopping people back into what wasn't working before is so important, because people's ideas of what restorative is vary so much. Some people are just like, congrats, you didn't come back here. Some people are like, you have a degree. Some people are like, you have a job. It varies so much, but it's just, for me, it's making sure that when we restore something, it's not just going back to normal and continuing what was not working before.
Excellent. I would like to shift a little bit in reference to, I'll give this to Ryan for now. Ryan, you mentioned earlier of being or having the opportunity to complete your degree. And in my opinion, that means that you are a product of restorative justice. And in that retrospect, what do you think is working well within our justice system?
Well, the degree, to clarify, the degree I actually had to go out and get myself from within the system. So I was in prison, and I knew I was going in. I was a software developer before I got locked up, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. I knew there was what I was doing before getting locked up was I was going to have to, I was working very hard to keep up with the latest trends, latest technology, because everything changes minute by minute with software, and that wasn't going to happen in prison. So I knew I was going to have to do something else, and I wanted to take what I had done and turn it into something that actually helps other people, but I didn't know what that was going to be at the time. And so I actually, because my family really was willing to look out for me, they were able to help me find a college, which turned out to be Adams State University, because they have one of the best degree by mail programs. And one of the few where you can actually complete a program through the actual physical mail, as opposed to online, which is very rare and hard to find now. That I was able to actually get that degree and work on victim advocacy and study criminology through the mail, which I'm very grateful for. And it was so. I didn't actually get to go in Texas for manslaughter. There's no restorative justice process. That was not part of it. But I do strongly believe in it, because it is. I feel like at the time of the crash, there was nothing I would have done to try and help the people I had hurt. But that with the lawyers, the attorneys, everyone said, do not talk to those victims. It's going to hurt you in court. So they're basically say, don't talk to them, don't talk to them, don't talk to them. But I wanted to say sorry. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to find out what I can do. And I'm also trying not to spend the rest of my life in prison at the same time. So it was like a weird battle. But on that note, the thing thought a lot about this question about what is the system doing really well, and the system really provides a lot of comfort to people. The way it's set up, the way it's set up right now is a huge comfort to a lot of people. And the idea that bad guys don't follow the rules, they get locked up, they go away, there's a place for them, and they're gone. And if you follow the rules, you can go and there's good guys you can rely on, and they can offer help to you. That is very satisfying inside of each one of us, and it is something I truly relied on myself for a very long time. And it's comforting, and it's nice to not have to think in depth, really, what do you have to do when something goes wrong? But I have come to learn that no matter what the situation, whether it's something small to something big, it's always more complicated because people are involved. But I will say, it is the way it is set up, that is the biggest advantage it has right now. It is an amazing comfort to many people.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else?
Yeah. So we thought about this a lot. It's a tough one, really, because you can quickly think of things that aren't working real well. But when you start to think about what is, it's a little bit tougher, to be honest. And so as I thought about it, I was like, to me, the biggest positive thing right now is the fact that we're having these conversations a lot more in general, especially in the law enforcement community. I would say, let me say this. I think it's really important for this conversation to say that it's important for everybody to recognize that every single police department is different. They're all different with their cultures, with the way things happen inside their agencies. Every single judicial system is different. Every DA's office behaves differently. Every corrections system throughout the country is a little different. So I may say something from my point of view, and you may, from your point of view, say, well, that's not what I've seen, right? And that's fair, because you may have an experience with something totally different than mine. But in general, from my perspective, what I have seen is, since around 2013, 2014, probably when the Ferguson event happened, that was really when I began to see a real shift. It was very small at first, very subtle, but a shift toward more accountability in general, right? And people looking around at each other and saying, "No, that's not right. That's not right." And I began to see that throughout law enforcement, where people were wanting to hold those officers or whoever who were too heavy-handed or talk to people like they shouldn't. They began to be held accountable at a much greater level. Still got a long way to go. There are still lots of improvements to be made. But I'll just say that from my perspective, seeing that shift, seeing the movement toward empathy, toward saying everyone doesn't need to go to jail in general. And again, some police departments may not be behaving that way, but ours and the one that I came from before, there was a strong shift toward looking at what's the best thing in this situation, all right? If we don't have to put a person in jail, let's not put them in jail. Let's let that be the last resort instead of the first resort. And so that conversation is something positive, but it needs to be a much broader conversation and throughout the whole criminal justice system, not just the front line. So that's my take.
I can respond as well. So some of what I do is some expert witness work. I have worked death penalty cases in Arizona. I've worked cases here in Colorado where youth have committed homicides, and I'm hired to come in and argue for mitigation factors. And so sometimes I get to see, I interview kids, juveniles who are in the juvenile detention centers. I interview adults who are in the prisons. And most times they don't often speak well of prison, all right, and what that incarceration experience is like. Sometimes the youth will mention that there may be a detention worker that they're working with that they've been able to establish a mentoring relationship with. And so they do appreciate that aspect of it. But many of the adults in the adult prison system don't feel like they're being rehabilitated. Many of them go to prison thinking about, hey, I'm going to change my life, you know, but they find it's very hard to do that. Maybe they're provided with some skills, but once they get back into the community, it's very difficult for them to adjust. They haven't been taught how to adjust in their communities. So they come from communities where there's drugs, where there's gangs, where there's violence, and they go right back to those communities. And because of the prison record, it's been made it very hard for them to get a job. And they want a job, right? And it's been very difficult for them. And so they struggle, and then eventually they revert back to what they know, selling drugs, the gang life, those kinds of things. So, you know, I know what the juvenile justice and the adult justice system is meant for, but when I bring my kind of critical lens to this, because I am a critical criminologist, and so, you know, I look at this also from kind of a structural perspective. What purpose does our prison serve, right? If we look at it from Durkheim would argue that crime it serves a functional purpose. He talks more about social solidarity. We can talk about other kinds of purposes. We can draw from a book that's written by Ryman and Leighton that's called The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. And basically what they argue in that book is that the criminal justice system hasn't been created to stop crime or to serve justice. It's been created to incarcerate the poor. And then when we think about the poor, we think about the intersections with race and other kinds of things, right? And so that's the general idea that, you know, we've created a system not to address crime. And part of their arguments is, let's look at how crime operates, right? Let's look at the criminal justice policies that we've created. And they spend some time comparing white-collar crimes versus the other kinds of crimes that are more highlighted in the media, right? That those crimes are committed maybe just as frequently, you know, the homicides, the in-person injuries, those kinds of things, right? People are being killed for both, but the way in which the policies are created for white-collar crimes, the punishments are less severe, you're not going to serve as much time, on and on in terms of those differences. So again, the authors of The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison are arguing the criminal justice system serves those who have money, right? And who can benefit from that money, right? And that's certainly an argument that we see about the criminal justice system, that there are inequalities that we see in our society. Until we fully address those inequalities, we can't reduce crime. So who's benefiting? And you know, I would argue that more as a society, we tend to benefit from the jobs that are created. Even me as a criminologist, I got a job because of crime and because of the crime that goes on, right? Criminology is one of those criminal justice programs that continue to grow, even here at UCCS. There are financial benefits that go with crime, right? And that's certainly an aspect of crime that we really don't think about in terms of who's benefiting. You know, who's designing the private prisons, and you know, it's traded on Wall Street. There are financial benefits there. People who are working in the juvenile justice system and the prison system, there are financial benefits there, right? And so there are a whole variety of ways in which, you know, this prison system and this juvenile justice system may not always be serving the needs of those who most need it. And if we really want to address those needs, we need to address these larger patterns of inequality.
Dr. Portillos, you are leading us where we are going.
All right.
And Aiyanna, I want us to dig a little deeper on this. In understanding what we just heard, and then also hearing Chief Mcarver say, every police department is different. And we hear there is a system within a system. And we are trying to navigate around all of those pieces. With that in mind, what are our systematic problems? Let's dig deep into what are those. We thought about all of the great things, the wonderful aspects that come along But what are our systematic problems that we have in criminalization?
I wish I could like crack my knuckles like
Yes.
this, but I can't. So I feel like this is important to know because I am less professional, less academic. I'm mostly coming from experience, right? So my family is from Colorado Springs. I come from a military family. I have a lot of family in San Antonio, and I have a lot of family in Puerto Rico. I have people who are the cops, the correctional officers, and then I think this is just crazy. I was getting dressed for this, y'all, and I was thinking about it, right? And I was like, wow, my dad is the only one in his siblings that did not go to prison. He's been to jail, but he's the only one who hasn't gone to prison, right? Why? His dad was literally a cop. He's like third generation, I think. And for some reason it came up, even my mom's side of the family. Most people have seen the inside of a jail cell. I think it was everybody except for my mom. I don't know why those two were the only exceptions, but it's probably because they went the other way. They were like, I'm gonna just read a book instead. But I think the one thing that I think of first is just dysfunction. Even in my own life, I will say it straight up. I grew up a lot differently than they did. I have a lot of privilege. I grew up in a stable household, but even for myself, I have these generational attitudes towards police that would probably not fare well if I were to be pulled over. I already get antsy thinking about it. I just think of all the stories. I think of my own experiences with police. I know that I'm going to act weird. They're probably going to think I'm acting weird. It's just going to turn into a cycle, right? And the amount of things that go into these systematic failures, it's wide-reaching. And for the most part, I think that race is the most front-facing one, right? Because you can look at somebody, and I feel like race is the most immediate thing that you look at somebody, and that's the first category you put them in, right? So race definitely affects everything, your class, right? I think the one case that I think of in my own family is the case of my great uncle. He got jumped at a park. This is the family story. He got jumped at a park. He was like, yo, my dignity's been stolen. They took his chain. And then he did something terrible. He committed arson. He set a apartment block on fire, right? So that's what he did. He displaced a bunch of families. He displaced 60 people, and he did end up killing people. That's horrible, right? But then I go to my grandmother, who is his sister, right? And she's like, he deserved a second chance. He was 16 when he did this. He was 16 years old. What he did was not right, but then I remember that he was a poor Latino man who just came to the country literally 2 weeks before, didn't speak English. He was just mad. He had no coping skills that he was given, because for the most part on the island, if somebody disses you, you diss them right back, and it's probably not good. That was just the culture, and it was brought over here, and it killed people, right? And then on top of that, his case, usually cases take forever. His was done in 6 months. He was gone in jail, put into jail. He got out on parole in 2013. He went back to jail. He went back to prison because he didn't understand what they said during parole. So he thought that he could go back to Puerto Rico, but then didn't report it. So that he ended up back there, and he is still there to this day, right? So just looking at, not excusing what he did, because there is individual responsibility with this. He did do that. All the societal factors that went into that, those are still real though. Class, age, ethnicity, race, ability, all of these things and more play into it. But then at the same time, I'm just his story probably could have been a lot different. It could have been a lot different. I'm not saying what he did was right, but I am saying that it could have been different for him, because it also influenced the attitudes of everybody in my family for so long. It still does. Nobody still trusts the cops. Nobody thinks they're gonna do them right. My grandmother is like, I don't want to talk to the cops. They always gonna do you dirty. Even if somebody did slight you and you are technically in the right, don't trust them.
I'd love to jump on the back of that, because we used to talk, or I used to, when I would teach, I taught in the police academy. I was a director of training for 5 years, and and I would always talk to the new recruits and then the officers who'd been in there for years, and I would talk about a similar kind of thing. I would say, imagine, this is kind of a long story, but I think you'll like it. So I would say, as an officer, if you pulled over a car, and let's just say that it was a kid on his way home from high school. He had his football gear in the back seat. When you pulled him over, he said, "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I was speeding. I apologize. I can't believe I did that. And, I'm the captain of the football team, and I make straight A's, and I was just trying to get to work because I'm running a little late." And the officer, I'm saying, picture this, right? And you're thinking, this is the kind of kid I would cut a break. He's doing all the right things, But then all of a sudden, they maybe smell a little odor of marijuana. And you said, "Is that marijuana I smell?" And then the kid says, "Yes, I'm so sorry. I've never done this before. It's the first time I've ever had it. I've got a joint that I was smoking, and it's, in the ashtray. I'm so sorry. Please don't do anything. If you tell my parents, they'll kill me," right? I said, "Now think about this situation and what you would think as an officer. Would this be a kid that you might cut a break to?" And I'd say, "Now, let's pause. Let's go to another traffic stop. You're driving through the inner city, poor area, right? Stereo blaring, boom, boom, boom. You're thinking, this is disrespectful." And so you pull the car over. As you go up to the car, the kid yells at you, "What the F are you stopping me for, man? Why? I'm just riding through the neighborhood. F you," or, and they're talking to you with this anger and hatred and vitriol, right? And you know what you're feeling as an officer. You're getting angry, right? How dare you talk to me that way? In this kid, let's talk about his life. He didn't go to school that day. His parents, when he came home, he came home to a mom, if he was lucky, who was at home because she probably worked all the time, maybe didn't even know who his dad was. And the mom said things like, "The cops are all assholes, right? They're all jerks. You can't trust any of them. And they're only out to hurt you, right? Realistically, right? Avoid them at all costs. And by the way, in some areas in this family, smoking marijuana was a totally normal thing. And nobody thought it was wrong. And although it's legal here in Colorado, I would talk about this in Alabama, where it's still illegal, and say, for this family, it was society that had imposed this random situation to be illegal that heavily affected the poor black community versus what it did to the more affluent white communities, right? I said, now, so this kid that you've just pulled over, he thinks you're in the wrong. You smell marijuana, and you say, "Is that marijuana in the car?" And he says, "Yeah, I have marijuana in the car. What the hell? I can smoke marijuana anytime I want. You're just holding me back, right?" I said, now, these two situations, which of those two kids was truly more in the wrong? The one who had been taught that marijuana was absolutely wrong his whole life, and you better avoid it or you'll be in trouble at home, or the kid who was taught that it was totally fine and the cops were bad and the whole system was meant to keep them down or pull back, right? What's the worst thing a cop could do in that moment? Arrest the kid that already hates the police, right? That kid needs the break. That kid needs the, "Hey, I understand where you come from. I understand the situation. I care. I don't want you to hate us. We're here to just try to help or take care of you." I was like, think about the impact that interaction would have in that situation versus cutting the break to the other one. I mean, that kid is wrong and knew it. The other kid thought he was in the right and thinks that you're the one holding them back, right? And so we don't change the world or we don't make things better by just doing the status quo, right? I mean, I want those kids out there who hate the police because all of their experiences have been negative. Everything they've been taught and shown have been negative. I'd like for law enforcement to work extra hard, right? To reach out to those parts of our society because that's how we're going to get better. So that's a story we would talk about. And by the way, I always ask cops too. Picture you're driving, you're on vacation, and you get pulled over. Tell me you're not a nervous wreck. Even as a cop, you're a nervous wreck. It's like, don't forget that. Because every time you pull over a car, they're a nervous wreck. no matter what, even if they don't think they did anything wrong. It's scary. And cops sometimes have to remember that. You forget it. When you're always on that side of the badge, or that, you're in the car with the lights on, you forget the impact that you're having on the people that you're interacting with. And so we're having those conversations, and you're right, Aiyanna, we all need to be more cognizant, and especially the law enforcement community.
So, one thing you mentioned too is that it's not just a frontline problem, which I totally agree with, and that's one thing I learned about, and it was an example I found when I was studying, is that, so if someone they're driving, they go too fast on an icy road, they hit a car, they kill someone, that's a crime, that's felony. Someone gets in a car, they go too fast, they see someone cuts them off, and they drive them off the road and intentionally kill them, that's a crime, and that's a felony. But if someone designs a car, and they willingly ignore all of the safety inspections and all of the safety guidelines for building the car, and then everyone who buys that car, the brakes fail, and then tons of people die, that is a misdemeanor, if it's a crime at all, depending on where the jurisdiction falls on that. And to me, that's one of the biggest issues, is what is actually considered a crime. And that's also coming up with pot's legal here, but it's not legal here, and it's not there. And then you get certain types of different messaging on this. So there's several, it's not one area of what the problem is. And then the added issue is that every part from the front lines of policing to people in the courtrooms who are deciding judgments, to the jails and prisons when they're dealing with these issues, they're all looking at that same thing of this is about retribution. This is about getting, this person did X, so now we're doing Y back at them. And that, looking at things that way, where it keeps pushing it harder and harder, and we end up with like our system right now, which is we're putting more people into prisons when crime is going down, which doesn't make sense. At this point, you would think that we should be letting up if that's the case. And the reason that keeps going up like that is because you're still, when you look at the media, when you're looking at the other things that are when you turn on anything, the message you keep hearing over and over again is about fear. You're afraid, and who is responsible for what, and who is doing this, who's doing that, who's up to this, what group is doing this to you right now, and who might be doing what. And that attitude and that mindset gets people defensive, and I feel like it's causing this situation where we want to put people away, we want to other people, and we need to have bad guys. We need to have a group of bad people. And I think it's really important, even when people do bad things, because no one's lived a perfect life. So everyone has done some wrong. It's figuring out how to minimize those wrongs for everybody and increase the amount of healing that we can have and prevent those things going forward. And I don't think our society has been looking at it that way.
I can address part of this as well. Just hearing Aiyanna's story and the family experiences kind of reminds me, of the stories that I hear from the young people that I interview in Fresno, California, Arizona, and a variety of suburbs there, and the inner cities there, here in Colorado Springs and in Denver and Aurora. It's the same kind of story, right? Where these kids are having these negative experiences. Their families are talking about these experiences as well, and feeling like the police aren't there to help them. They feel like they can't trust the police. And it's the same stories over and over. And in some ways fits with my own experiences growing up, right? I could probably spend another panel talking about all my experiences and my friends and family's experiences as well with the police. And so, that more critical hat that I have looks at the police from a very kind of critical perspective of saying, okay, yeah, we know that before there was the criminal justice system, there was slavery, which was intended as another form of policing for particular groups. And then from there, we had other racialized forms of social control. And now, it's evolved to what we have today to kind of help explain some of the racial disparities that we see in the criminal justice system and in the juvenile justice system. But recognizing that at the same time, I have to also take into consideration, similar to what Chief said earlier, is that, there are differences within the police departments, right? And I've worked with a number of officers in CSPD, and some of those officers have had the same kind of experiences that I had growing up. And that brings in a little bit more compassion as a result of having had those experiences with the communities that they police. And I recognize that, right? I recognize that in the past, there have been some issues here on the UCCS campus with the police and racially minoritized communities as well. I'm not hearing as much of it now, but certainly in the past that was certainly the case. From the youth that I talk to, I don't hear as much about CSPD. The gang kids that I talk to, they say, we're having good experiences with the police. There's not any negative interactions that we can talk about. They're nice. They really try to generally help us out. And so I can recognize that maybe something here in Colorado Springs is a little bit different in other places where I've interviewed young kids in the smaller cities like Trinidad. Right now in Aurora, Colorado, a case that I just finished on Monday, I'm writing the report. And that context there is so different than some other places that I've seen. We know the well-publicized case of Elijah McClain that was killed there in Aurora, Colorado. And there's been a whole incidents that were reported in the Aurora Centennial about trustworthiness of police being disloyal, overuse of power, a whole variety of issues that we see within that police department. And so when I go talk to those kids, that I hear a different set of experiences around racial bias, because that's, again, some of what was depicted in the article, you see the differences there, right? And the kids' experiences and the families' experiences, the way that they're talking about law enforcement is certainly different. So I think, there's that part of my critical hat that can understand the kind of more abolitionist approach, but there's also the kind of part where I know these officers, I've seen them interact, and I know they're well-meaning, right? They really want to truly help the communities, at least here that I've seen in Colorado Springs, and we don't always see that. So how do we get that kind of policing that we see in other communities and bring it to these others that we think of as high crime, really dangerous, so that we can have more compassionate policing in those communities as well?
Thank you for gearing us to our next question.
I'm doing that.
Yes, you're doing amazing. As we have about 10 or so minutes before we move to open up our dialogue, with the understanding of external factors like socialization, like systems within a system, with our own personal experiences. Chief, I want us to talk about, quote unquote, the change begins with us.
Yeah, so, I mentioned that one of the best things I've seen, one of the positives, is that we're having this conversation. And I think that it's so important that no matter, everybody in this room, we're sitting down here and we have no idea, right, what's going through your mind as we talk, because you have your perspectives, as you talked about in the opening. Every one of us sees the world through your own eyes which has all of your experiences behind it. And so I think in order for us to really make progress in this area, in this world, we need more of this kind of dialogue where people are open to hearing something they disagree with and who are open to disagreeing, and the other person being open to that conversation, and ultimately everybody having the mindset that you want to grow, you want to learn, because I don't know about you guys. I just had this thought, but some of my best friends in life were people that I really didn't get along with at first. Like, it was almost like we probably had some big argument or some point early in our childhood or something, but they ended up being some of my best friends. And it's because you learn to dialogue, you learn to talk about deep things. And I think that's really important. And in order to do that in our society, what scares me that I see is everybody going into their corners. I think we all see that, right? Everybody wants to go into their corners, and nobody wants to have the conversations, and everybody wants to get offended immediately. I want to toss out a thought that the people who disagree, there are people out there right now that would think us having this conversation is crazy, right? There are those people out there, and they don't even want to hear a conversation like this. But we need those people to listen. And if everybody gets instantly defensive with somebody who doesn't want to agree or acknowledge their conversation, it pushes them further away, right? In other words, I want us to all think about always being compassionate and caring and open whenever we have conversations. Like, this has been great. I mean, we're always hearing interesting things, but I don't know. I think I always want to talk about that, to remind yourself to be cordial and try not to push people away from you by getting mad at them because they're ignorant to some things that you may be aware of, right? Don't get mad at them because of that. Be gentle and be kind, and they will come toward you for more conversation as opposed to turning away from you and never listening again. Because that's been my experience when I see these kinds of conversations sometimes out there. So,
Dr. Portillos, keeping that in mind, we want to be able to have these broader conversations, but due to our personal lenses, it will make it difficult. How can we do that? How do we, when we know that in order for this to actually move forward, we would all have to begin to be closer to the same ideal? But if we are not, then it possibly cannot move forward. How can we address those that are totally opposed to, again, even us having this conversation now?
Yeah, I think, and some of those conversations can be very difficult, right? And I think that's part of what I try to do in my expert witness work is that when I argue for mitigation in death penalty cases and the homicide cases that I work, I try to explain it in a way that, yes, is academic, but that you can see how this person's life has been shaped by these larger structural factors, right? And I think having those kinds of discussions where we can really look at the entire picture, not just this criminal image of this person in front of us that denies them of their humanity. We need to remember that, yes, they made a bad decision. They committed a crime that in some cases is very horrible, right? But why? Why did this happen in the first place? How can we understand what got this little kid up to this older gentleman that then ends up committing a very horrible crime, right? How do we understand that process? And it begins, I think, like this, having these kinds of conversations, talking with people that we don't always agree with, and saying, hey, can we find a middle ground, right? Maybe we don't fully appreciate restorative justice, but what else could we do to kind of come to that middle ground, right? And I know a lot of people that I work with are clearly guilty, right? And I know that my work has helped get some of them off of death row. I know that my work has been used to help in plea negotiation and sentences and those kinds of things, right? So I know that, by trying to educate folks, we certainly can do that, but I know I can't convince everybody, right? In death penalty cases, I only need to convince one person in Arizona, right? Out of a jury of 9. That's easier to do, right? Just one person. But when you've got a large group like we have today, how do you get everybody to work together to come to a conversation like this, right? And I think that's the difficult part, that we need facilitators like you to kind of help us get to that middle ground.
One thing is, I feel like it's really important, like the big, I feel, start to a solution to all of these problems. It starts with everyone, and it's something that everyone can do. And it's really, whenever there's an issue in the community, it starts with looking at it and going, who needs help? Or if someone's offering a solution, asking, what are they offering? And coming at it with that mindset, I think really it changes how you look at the situation. Because I started doing that after my accident, because I had to realize, because I've now taken life, and now it's hard, like I can't judge people the way that I was judging people before. And if I want people to give me the benefit of the doubt, then I need to start giving the benefit of the doubt. And it's very different. It's a very different perspective. And the idea, like, there are many times where I've really had to bite my tongue, and because my instinct is immediately, whether it's watching the news or an incident that's close to me, I want to react. I want to, and I want the people to hurt like I've been hurt. And it's hard to think in those moments, who needs help and what is this person offering as a solution? But that's when things get really hard, I feel like that will lead to bigger solutions down the line.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for that. In transitioning a little bit, let's open up this discussion. Let's open it up to any questions that anyone in our audience may have. All things on table.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
I'm a professor here in social work, and I also sit on the El Paso County Community Corrections Board. And in learning more and reading, I read about 25 cases a week as a board member to make the decision regarding can the judge or DOC use community corrections as an alternative sentence. And what I see is in the system that is so frustrating for me is that we are creating what I call a hamster wheel or a revolving door, and we're not helping individuals get the right treatment and support they need, either coming out of DOC or even from diversion in jail, because the transition, not everybody has an opportunity for community corrections. And the real work regarding restorative, any type of restorative, is going to happen with the community. It's not as available in the prison system as the general public thinks it is. And what is the barrier there? Is it making somebody so much money, like big pharma, that it's better to keep, and medical insurance, I'm using those as analogies, to keep, because sick people make people a lot of money. So if you use that analogy, so let's just not address what really needs to happen. Or is it that we're not putting the right funding and systems in place? Because we know what the solution is and why isn't it happening, and we're just creating more population in jails. And in Colorado, it is crazy. I see individuals, other than that have committed some type of really heinous crime, the longest sentences I see are drug related or substance related, such as selling, distributing, or just having it on their person, rather than sexual crimes or child abuse or domestic violence. It is a system that confounds me sometimes, because we're making people criminals that, yes, maybe they made a bad decision, but they're not a bad person. We're ruining people's lives. So there, I could talk about this all day, because it's like, what? Yeah. We know the answer. Why can't we do something about it?
So I have an opinion here. It's you kind of said it a lot yourself there, but we know that prison's the worst thing, right? No matter what, when you go in there, it's almost like higher ed for criminals, right? You're just gonna, whatever you went in as, you're probably gonna come out even more angry, even more likely to commit crime, you know, and all those things. So
well, it's traumatizing,
right? And so community-based corrections is a far better plan. But the problem is, I think, is that our infrastructure, you know, from early on has been around incarceration. And so we have very few resources dedicated to that type of thing, right? And I look at it like this, and since I've been in Colorado, I've learned that the mental health systems here are better than where I came from, believe it or not.
Well, that's not good.
It's not. Alabama was in really bad shape. All of the money, just point blank, all of the money had been taken from mental health and put into prisons. We were having to arrest people because there was no other option. And so finally, around 2018, it began to turn. And the funds began to get moved over because the pressure got so high, right? And finally, they're going in the right direction. But it's the same thing here. There's very little attention on that question that you're asking, right? There aren't many people out there even talking about what are options we could be doing that would be better, because it's just easier to just keep funneling them into prison. The system is designed for that. Changing a system's design is effort, work, and money. So we just keep doing what we've been doing. And so I think the pressure somehow has to mount to get more attention on it.
I think another thing is that we are all, like, I know this for a fact. Like, when it works for me, I am complacent and I'm cool with it, right? Like, I had a situation where I went through the legal system and I wanted him to hurt as much as I did. I really wanted that. But after a lot of therapy, I do recognize that if homie had like mental health supports, we both wouldn't be where we're at. But that wasn't there. We didn't have that. So I do recognize that. But at the same time, I feel like it's hard, because then you have to, if I want this to work, then I have to also make sure that when it works for me, I can't condone it when it works for me. I have to condone it wholesale, which is incredibly hard to do when somebody's done wrong by you and you really want them to feel that, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of going back to community corrections, I think my niche is more so like thinking, like I'm more so like addiction, like recovery, like what's recovery? You know. And thinking about all yes, you can do all of these things within like the facility itself, but it drops people once they're out. There's nothing for people. And on top of that, inside the facility, it is structured. You have a place to go. You know who to go to if you have an issue. Once you're out there, it's just kind of do whatever you can, if you can even do it, right? So in that way, we are just constantly fumbling the ball, because once people get out, they're right back at it or worse off, right? Especially when you're like, okay, you can give people therapy and all these systems to work through and all these supports, but then when they're like out there on their own, and most of these things just fall apart, what are they supposed to do other than to go back with what they knew, or something a little better because now they know a couple new options, right? But that's not even if they're going to work for it. And on top of that, thinking about the community's role, like, yes, it's individual, a lot of change is individual, but who's going to keep you accountable? Who's going to pick you up when you fall flat on your face? Some people just don't have that. But at the same time, the answer is not just incarcerate more, because that's horrible.
I would agree as well that, I think we need to start by looking at, the carceral state and knowing that it's built for punishment, right? And not rehabilitation. And we need to recognize that. But we can change it too, right? And again, going back to the work that I've done with these kids, I hear their stories. I hear their stories of where they talk about being punished in elementary school, in middle school, and high school. So now that we have a school to prison pipeline, it's not just in the criminal justice system anymore. It's now in our schools. And so these young kids, and we know from the literature that the school to prison pipeline typically, more likely, will involve racialized, minoritized youth, right? And so we've set up a system on punishment, and we certainly need to change that. So I agree with what others have already said. We need to change that system.
And following up with that, it's that mindset that really is the big difference. I went to treatment at Cedar on the Anschutz campus before going to prison, and both in treatment and prison, they pull you out of society, and then you are in there, and then staff basically runs your life from that point on. The difference is that when you're in prison, they keep you out of society. That's their whole goal, is to keep you out of society. And then there's a little bit of trying to make sure you obey so you stay out of society. Treatment, their goal is to help you get better so you can reintegrate into society when you get back out. And they also that comes through in a lot of different ways. Another big thing to keep in mind with both treatment and prison is that pretty much everyone's coming back out. Like, they're coming back out one way or another. So you want everyone to be ready when they get out. So in treatment, a big way it comes in is like they encourage families to come in. They have set times where families can interact and help, and they have ways where families can send in support letters and things like that, where it's guided through with counseling, and they work through it, and they can set it up that way. And there's no reason why we couldn't set up, when people need to be pulled from society, to set it up that way. We just don't. It's that we keep on the focus on blame and punishment, and since it's on blame and punishment, then the thought is, well, I don't get counseling. I can't afford counseling outside of prison, so this person who committed a crime shouldn't be allowed to have treatment. But in the end, society is going to pay for it one way or another when someone's in crisis, whether it's by either they're going by supporting them, or by something's going to happen and someone gets hurt from it. And it doesn't just hurt. It hurts the person involved, and it hurts their family, and it hurts all of these families, and it spreads outward, and it gets out of control.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is restorative justice only offered to someone after their sentence is served, or can it be used in probation as well?
It can actually be used in lieu of a sentence, especially right now for juveniles. A lot of in Longmont, they have a program actually where there's the Longmont Community Justice Project works with police so that juvenile offenders, basically juveniles who get arrested, they can work with LCJP and then not have a felony get on their record, which is amazing. They work with the people involved, and it's a great program. There are several programs like that around the country, but it mainly is for juveniles. Sometimes they even have it for adults in misdemeanor offenses, but that's kind of where it is. And then Usually for more serious offenses, then it's only offered like after the fact.
Any other questions?
So I kind of heard you guys talking about the culture here with your police department and how the community's attitudes towards it is a lot more positive, and I've definitely seen that, especially being from Pueblo, where the attitudes towards the police is not so positive. Why do you think the police department in Colorado Springs has received such positive attitudes from the community, and what has this police department implemented to positively impact these communities?
So I can't speak for the whole Colorado Springs Police Department, but here on our campus, what you're seeing is, it's a holistic thing about setting a culture and setting expectations. So when I first got here, one of the very first things I did was had an all hands-on meeting. Everybody come in, and I said, let's talk about who we want to be. As a campus police department, what are our values? And I had every single person in our department write down all of the things that they think we should value. I ended up with like 60 values, right, of all these things that we value. And then I sent an email back out to them, and I listed all 60. And I said, now pick the top 6 things. Out of that list, put a check mark or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on what you think. And so when they did that, we came out with the standard ones, which are like professionalism and accountability and those things. But 2 that really I was so proud of, and I think is the difference here, is we have inclusiveness, right? And we talk about that. What is inclusiveness? Well, here we make it an obvious value. We talk about it all the time. We want everyone on this campus, no matter who they are, to know that they are included, right? When it comes to our department, it doesn't matter who you are. And we try to do everything we can, from hanging out in all the different areas of campus, going to sporting events. It doesn't matter. We want everyone to know we care about them. And then the other thing was guardianship, right? No police department says guardianship, really, right? That's not, sometimes in other campuses maybe, but we wanted our views, our way of doing things is we wanted every student here to feel like we were there like big brothers and sisters, right? Not like the cops. We're here to take care of you. When you fall and make a mistake, we want to treat you like we were somebody who actually, we love you. Like, what do you do when somebody makes a mistake that you love? What do I do with my sons when they make a mistake? I don't kick them out of the house, right? I hold them and hug them. We have serious talks. We talk about where the right direction is. But our whole process is to see success in everyone here. And we make sure that our police department's culture is that way and our expectations are that way. And we hold each other accountable, right? Because I want to throw this out and say that cops are people. Cops have bad days. And we have to look at each other and hold each other accountable and say, I think you're having a bad day. You need to, before you go out there into the community, you need to think about that. Take a break. Maybe you need to take the day off, right? Maybe who knows what's going on in their personal lives. But we hold each other accountable, and I'm really, really proud of them. They want this, right? They want this community to feel that. And I think that's why you're seeing it maybe here. And I wish I could speak more about the city as a whole, but I don't know that answer, so.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 questions for Chief Carter. So what form of policing does the campus police department use, and how can someone succeed in law enforcement?
Yeah. So the form I would most closely align with like community-based, right? I mean, I think ours goes a little farther, and I'd almost call it family-based policing, but as one of those main models you see, it would be closest to that, but I want us to go a step further. And I think in order to be successful in law enforcement? I love this question, and it's you need to be well-rounded, right? You don't need to have a one view of the world. You need to understand and care about and truly care about. Don't take that lightly. You have to actually care about all the people in the world around you, regardless of how they see it, right? You might totally disagree. It doesn't matter. You love them the same. And you really have to be that kind of person if you want to be successful in law enforcement. Too many people come into law enforcement with a very singular view of the world, right? Maybe they grew up in a certain kind of neighborhood and are only around the same kind of people and all of that. When they get in law enforcement, they're going to struggle because cops have to deal with everyone, right? And you have to do it in the right way. So that's what I think is most important.
Thank you.
Can I go back to the question up top? I don't know if I have a clear answer in terms of why CSPD is a little bit different. I know there's still issues, right? I mean, all we need to think about is Devon Bailey, for example. I've had students who have done research on the LGBTQI population here in Colorado Springs. They've voiced concerns that we don't often hear about. I still hear from certain youth that there's some negative experiences, particularly if they're in gang involved, but not the ones that I've interviewed. So, I know there were more experiences probably 30, 40 years ago, just talking to various individuals. So, maybe it's that shift in culture. Maybe it's, I know there have been other issues around homelessness. So there's been a whole variety of issues that have been raised. But I think, what we're seeing with policing today, at least what I've seen with CSPD in recent years, is a willingness to listen to the community, a willingness to hear the concerns and try to address those. And I think that's a good start to be able to do that.
Any other questions, both virtually and in person?
I can kind of speak to something because I've been involved with the police department and also El Paso County Sheriff's Department and the municipalities in helping build the co-responder program and also the community response team. And it really comes around our mental health crisis in this county that started coming together with agencies in behavioral health coming together about in 2012 and identifying the crisis and the fact that we have Colorado, especially El Paso County, has fewer resources than other places. The CJC population became unmanageable regarding the amount of people. It was just, as the sheriff said at the time, we are a psychiatric hospital. And so there were great efforts in the community around mental health, and the sheriff and the chief of police made a commitment to get officers trained in CIT and mental health first aid. And that over the years, I've seen a shift greatly. And I don't know this statistically, but a lot of problems I would say that people have maybe with those sworn officers and deputies that haven't gone through CIT training to understand. And then there was a kind of I don't know if it's official or what you call it, but there's a real effort in the co-responder program and the CRT program to not make a charge with an individual that you go to a call, and if it has a behavioral health related issue, if it's mentally health involved, don't charge that person, because all you're doing is setting up failure for that individual who cannot follow through and gets a bench warrant, so forth and so on. And let's get that person to the right treatment, the right place, the right time. And that significantly reduced the population in CJC. Now, there are, it's not perfect, But I think our community, at least I've seen from a boots on the ground behavioral health clinician look and working so closely with law enforcement, it has made a significant change. So that would be what I would.
I was actually going to say that when you started talking, I was going to throw out the CIT model, and because what it has helped do is it's helped officers be more empathetic because the training is really good. So a little plug for all the cops out there, right? There's a lot of anger toward them in a lot of ways, but I will say the vast majority of the cops go into the work to do the right thing. Sure, there are some that don't, right? But the most of them do. But over time, when you only deal with negativity all the time, it erodes your empathy. That's bad for policing. What CIT has done is it's brought in training that teaches cops and reminds them of what it's like to not only be somebody who is in mental health crisis, like how tough that is as the person, but also how tough that is as family members and everybody around it. The other thing CIT did that really helped was it requires communities to work together to provide the resources to keep them out of jail. So before, like I told you, there weren't those resources. It was like the cops had no options. They just had to put you in jail. People hated the cops for that. Well, CIT has created a model where the resources are there so the cops don't have to do that. Now they can direct them in the right direction. So those are some really positive things, and I totally agree with you. Something else that I would like to see more of is sort of make cops spend more time working in volunteering, things like homeless shelters, right? If cops spend, let's say 99% of the interaction a police officer has with a person who is homeless is negative, right? It's when they're doing something criminal or whatnot. So what happens is cops get this bias that says homeless people are troublemakers, right? And then they lose their empathy. So what's really important is being able to work with people when they're at their best, not their worst, right? And it reminds you to be empathetic about people in general, right? And I think policing is working and getting better because of that. There are departments that don't do CIT, right? There are departments out there, I can't speak for them all, but anyone that's doing CIT, I agree. All of our officers here are CIT certified as well.
One clarification, can you clarify CIT and JCJ so that we can understand what those acronyms mean?
CIT is Crisis Intervention Training.
Thank you.
And I think this is horrible. I've worked my whole career. CJC, I think, is County or Criminal Justice Center.
Okay.
So it's our county jail.
Thank you. Awesome.
How can an average, everyday person help, become part of this, etc.? How can someone in general who doesn't have a background become involved and help?
I've talked too much.
So as I was saying before, it's really looking at it whenever anything happens, even when you're looking on the news and just watching everyday things, understand trying not to blame and looking to see how to help. And I feel like the biggest way to do that is you can do it from if it's from crisis to crisis, if you're hearing about somewhat a crime that's happened on the news, and think about what actually happened, who's involved, that person's family, the victim, their families, other people who might have been hurt in this, and does it help the way that they're presenting it, even in the media? Is it being helpful, and is there being a solution being presented that will actually prevent this from happening again? And the other aspect is that we're coming up on election season, and there's going to be a lot of solutions being offered and promoted. So the question is when someone comes up and says, I'm the candidate that does this, well, is that helpful? Is that useful? Is that going to prevent what's going to happen further on? Is that going to cause more pain and suffering? And remember, with each person, whether they've made bad decisions or not, they come with a family, they come with loved ones, and whatever happens, it spreads out. So how can we use whatever happens and actually transform it meaningfully to help the community going forward? And that's, I feel like, a big part of why restorative justice keeps coming up in these conversations.
I'd say be kind, be compassionate, and be vocal.
I would say part of it is, and I think I touched on this earlier, it's let's not fall victim to our prejudices and biases. And I think when we see that certain kinds of things happen, we automatically can kind of tend to do that. We tend to think of them as monsters. We tend to think of them as evil persons. But let's remember that there is humanity there. Let's remember that there are a variety of reasons why people do the things that they do. At least the gang members that I've studied, that certainly has been the case. And everyone's situation is different as well. And so let's remember that our individual biases and prejudices can impact how we view specific groups. And so I think that helps explain part of some of the experiences that we've had around policing growing up that we've talked about earlier. And so we need to move beyond those.
I like to tell people anybody can be involved because everybody's involved. Like, let's be real. Like, if we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, nobody looks at the teacher in the third grade classroom, right? I just picked up this statistic from a conference I just went to, but in preschool, Black kids are 2 times more likely to be suspended from school. These are 5 and 6-year-olds. That just sets you're 5 and 6. That already sends you down the journey of, I don't like authority. Don't tell me what to do. And on top of that, you're just like, I'm gonna get in trouble. They're out to get me. That it puts in your head immediately. So even if it doesn't matter who you are, you can challenging what you think you know, challenging your biases, your prejudices. And on top of that, I do tell people all the time that activism is a double-edged sword. If it does not come back on you, you're not doing it right. Everything you do, you have to challenge yourself in that as well. To challenge what you think you know. Why do you know what you know? How do you know that? So yes, I think that is one big thing, because I think we, like you were saying, crime plays a role. Usually it plays that's not what we're supposed to do, right? This is the thing that we don't like, right? But then crime has a social context. Why is that a crime? How is it a crime? Who committed the crime? Why were they committing the crime? So just asking questions why, instead of just immediately going to, that's a bad person, they deserve to be there, and starting to why the absolute heck out of it, I think that gets us a little further than we were.
Awesome. As we narrow down on our timing, again, thank you all. Thank you all. Thank everyone on our virtual and everyone here. I want us just to close out one statement, one word, a sentiment. We're here to discuss, can we fix crime? Can we?
Absolutely.
I think defining fix is important, right? I think that the world can be much better. I think we can do a lot better. Perfection, it's going to be tough, but we should strive to be the best that we can be. And that's the direction we need to go.
Sorry.
I think it depends on the type of crime that you speak about, but if we're talking about the kinds of crimes that I look at, I don't think we can, right? And punishment is not going to work. We need to address these larger inequalities and the way in which they filter down and influence people's experiences and shape their experiences. That's why I often talk about constrained choice, right? We have these larger pattern on inequalities, and people make these decisions based on these larger forces that are around them.
To put it succinctly, how do we even get here?
Yeah. That is awesome. Again, just wanting to thank you all personally. It was awesome just being a moderator for this particular event, and leaving with a few thoughts as we leave out and we go home and we think about what we have now taken in and been a part of. I encourage us all to know that the change does begin with us. It begins with us. We are a part of this change. That we are all sitting in this room is not by chance. So definitely take that on as a challenge. And then also holding each other accountable, holding ourselves accountable. That is something also to make sure that when you have the opportunity to create change, do it as soon as you can. It's important. And then lastly, spoken well by Chief, police are people. Police are people. So in keeping that in mind, we can again start to create empathy for everyone, the entire world, not just ourselves, not just people that look like us, not just the type of people we know, but everyone. And I think that's all. Thank you all so much. You have a good night.